Hello and welcome to Microsoft Hates Greg. My name is Greg Deckler, and today we're returning to Nick Desbarats' More Practical Charts in order to explore shape size charts. Now, why are we doing this? And well, quite frankly, it's because I love these books. I love practical charts and more practical charts. They're both phenomenal books, gorgeous. I think I refer to them more right now than my own books. So, really love these books. If you don't have them on your bookshelf, you should consider it. So today, and the other thing is because there's this one particular chart that Nick lays out in this book that when I saw it, I was like, wow, I have never seen that chart before in Power BI. And it'll become obvious as to why. But I was like, how would you create that in Power BI? So I've been wanting to cover this chart type for a while, but it's taken me a bit to in order to get there, if you will. All right, so let's jump to page right here. So shape size charts, here they are. So these are, your classic bubble map and your scatter chart in Power BI, right? And I've always kind of gravitated to the scatter chart because I love that you can get, especially if you add color into it, that you can get, basically at a glance, you can tell 4 pieces of information about a particular data point, right? You have your y-axis, your x-axis, you have the size of the bubble, and you can also add color to the bubble if you want. So that's 4 pieces of information versus most chart types give you, 2 at best, right? But there's this one chart in here that Nick presents, and it's right here. Which when I saw this again, I was like, wow, that's a cool looking chart. Now, even Nick, even says it may be too complex for some audiences, but there's some great information all in this one chart, right? Again, 4 pieces of information: a profit margin, revenue, what store it is, what category that they're selling. And then I can also see, the great thing is I can see a comparison between, the different stores and what they sell, as well as each category in which, how the stores are related to one another. So tremendous amount of information packed into a single visual, which is cool. All right, so how do you create this? Now, my hope was after dealing with, I had some good success with heat maps and so good success with jitter plots, that this was going to be easy and I'd be able to use a scatter chart or a bubble chart to be able to display this. But as it turns out, that is not quite the case. So this is about as close as I could get with the default scatter chart. And when I try to do it properly, the way Nick's visual is laid out, right? One, it wouldn't allow me, like if I take this out and I try to put category into this y-axis, it won't actually let me put a text field into the y-axis. So there's an immediate limitation, right? And then when I actually put a store, which is numeric in my case, and I set it to don't summarize, then they doesn't play well with one another, right? It sits here and says, oh, they aren't playing together nicely. It actually says that. And so, this was, so it just wasn't working out. Let's put it that way. And I tried every which way to try to get it to work. And this is about the best I could do. And that's just not what I'm looking for, right? Okay, so I was able to complete this challenge. And here it is. So I think that this is a reasonable facsimile of a Nick's chart right here. It's a reasonable representation of what it's doing. So I have, but what I used was a matrix. Okay, so I used a matrix and I was able to put category into the rows, and then I was able to put store into the columns. That worked out very, very well. But the problem is, how do I get circles? And how do I get circles of different sizes? Well, turns out need to use SVG. Now, the nice thing about that is that I have actually done some SVG programming, and I actually have a number of quick measures out here in the gallery, including this recreation of Stephen Few's red dot, right, where I made it bounce and blink and spin and do all kinds of crazy stuff, right? So now the one caveat about it, if you're trying to copy the code from these, for whatever reason, it replaces the colon with ampersand colon semicolon. So if you actually copy this and paste it in somewhere, it's not going to work. You need to actually replace this ampersand colon semicolon with an actual colon. So just something to be aware of. Okay, so let's go back to this guy. So had to create a measure in order to get this to work. So what I did was this measure here. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the bottom part of the code for the time being. Forget about the color for right now. But basically you set up your variables for the different attributes of your circle that you want. And then you have a header, and that header is going to be always going to be the same for any SVG graphic, right? You're starting your SVG tag and includes some attributes in there. And then you have a footer, and that's always going to be the same too. That's going to be the end of your SVG tag. So I always set up my SVG measures this way because then, as you can see in the result, I can just concatenate the header with the whatever, I'm actually trying to display, and then my footer, and it all works out pretty nicely. So anyway, so here I just have a circle tag. And you can see I have a CX of 19, a CY of 19. My radius is my radius that I've calculated, which in this case is my sum of my table revenue divided by 1 million. I've got my fill with my color, got my fill with opacity and all of that sort of stuff. And that's my circle tag, right? And that's what actually creates the circles that you see in the graphic. Now, one thing that I do want to mention, I probably should have started out with, but we'll get to it now, is that in order to create the data for this, what I did was I created a table and entered data query of my categories. Then did a generate series of 1 to 24 for my stores. And then my table here is basically a cross join between those, where I do a RAND between. This is 1 million and 16 million. The profit margin fail. So something interesting about RAND between, it doesn't like decimals like at all. So I tried creating a RAND between it that followed Nick's example of 0.4% to 22.5%. And it did not work out at all. You can see I just got all zeros. I then tried, okay, maybe if I use, maybe it doesn't like the negatives. I tried 0 to 0.225. Anytime I had a decimal in there, no bueno. Did not like it whatsoever. So I had to use RAND between of 1 to 23, and then I divided it by 100. So I got around it and got my percentages for my profit margin, but wanted to point out that little caveat, I guess you could say. Okay, so let's get into the other part of this measure, which is kind of interesting because for my color down here, I either need to use like common names like red, blue, green, that sort of stuff, or I need to use a hex code, a HTML hex code. But luckily enough, let me get back to here. I've actually created that. So when I went on my tirade of creating Excel to DAX translations, one of them was dec to hex, it's decimal to hexadecimal, which is this code right here, as you can see. So I had to incorporate this code into my code in order to convert the decimal of the profit margin into a hex code color and attempt to get a gradient out of the thing. That was not perfectly successful, so I tried to go from red being low to green being high with sort of a yellow in the middle. Not super successful. You can see I still have some blacks and things in here. I probably could use some more. If I did some more work, I might be able to get around it. But as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm grabbing my max profit margin, and since converting from decimal to hex also does not like decimals, even though decimals in the name, it doesn't. That's not what it means. It wants whole numbers, right? So I had to multiply that by 100 in order to get a whole number. And then I do some kind of wonky logic here because essentially if it's a low profit margin, right, I want more saturated red, not less saturated red. So I have to do some math to get around that. And then there's in the middle is my dec to hex, my hex color, which is just my decimal to hex, that I copied and pasted in. And then I can get to my color, where basically, as you can see here, okay, if the profit margin is less than 8, then it should be a red color. So I do a hashtag my hex color, because I got it down to like 1 digit, essentially, is the way that I kind of solved this, because I didn't want to have to deal with like whether it's 1 digit or 2 digit. I'm just going to make it all 1 digit. So I have my hex color, and then white for the rest for blue and green. And then for less than 16, I want it to be a yellowish color. That proves kind of interesting because you have to have, a mix of red and green and then a little bit less blue. So that's how I solved that problem. And then for my green, right, I want no red, I want all green and then no blue. So that gives me my shades of green. And so then that allowed me to do some form of gradient, right? Okay. So that's what the measure. Now, the interesting thing with using an SVG in a matrix is you have to be kind of careful with and set things up correctly. One, you have to specify that your measure is an image URL as a data category. Okay, so that's step one. But you also have to kind of tweak the table a bit. Now, one of the annoying things, and I'm probably not going to find it. Maybe it's grid. There's a setting somewhere in here to automatically. I thought it was in column headers, but I'm not seeing it. Options, auto size width. For whatever reason, when you use an SVG graphic, that does not work. It does not auto size. And it's kind of annoying that you have to kind of individually make sure all the columns are wide enough in order to fit the maximum circle diameter. And because there's no way, like in Excel, I can select my columns, or for each individual column, I can specify, like in pixels and that, how wide I want that column to be. But Power BI does not have that functionality, at least not that I'm aware of. So that's kind of annoying. Another kind of limitation, if you will. The other thing you need to go down here, and you need to go down here to image size, and you need to adjust the height and the width so that you don't get like cutoffs, in your circles. They're not cut off at the tops or the sides or anything like that. So in this case, 38 pixels did the trick for that, which is why, if you noticed in the measure, I center my circle at 19 and 19, right? Okay, so sorry, I'm getting a spam call. All right, so what's the next? So that is basically, sort of in a nutshell, how this graphic came about. But then I also wanted to add in this nice thing he's got here as far as this legend, as far as the revenue. I love this legend, the way he's got this laid out. So I wanted to recreate that, and I also wanted to recreate this profit margin and this gradient, that he had in his original in his book. So how do we do that? Well, the way I did it was I created this legend table, right? And you can see here, I've got a value of 5 million, 10 million, 15 million. I then did a little bit of DAX in order to get like more of a display, where I would want to have it $, and then 5 million, 10 million, 15 million with the M. And then this column here is, again, it's just that same SVG graphic, but I set my color to be this gray, this kind of neutral gray, which is similar to what Nick did in his book. But again, it's just, basically the same code as what I used in the measure. And then I also have to set that to be an image URL, right, for that column. And so once that was done, then I could actually set this table up to where I just put I think this is actually my legend display. No, this is my legend graphic. Put that in there. I renamed it to, just double clicked here and renamed it to revenue. For this one, I double clicked it and renamed it to space, so that it didn't have anything show up, which again, that emulates what Nick was doing in the book. And in that way, then I could actually have this table be laid out small, big, medium, large, as far as 15, 10, 15 million. Okay, so that covered that piece, that component of it. Now, this one, you might be wondering how I did this. Well, this is really a combination of things. So there's the text box, there is a card visual, and there is another card visual. And this is actually, in the middle here, is actually an image, and I'll show you how I created it. Because I couldn't think of any other way to do it. So basically for these are just measures, right, where I'm grabbing my max of my profit margin or my min of my profit margin, and then I can put that into a card visual and format it correctly, and away we go. This is just text, so easy enough. This, what I actually ended up doing, I think what I did was I did something like this where I said, okay, I'll do a conditional formatting. And what I did first was I said, okay, what is the actual, this is the circle is 77744. I think I actually used 88844. And then like this red is FF0000. Right. So what I did was I said conditional formatting, background color, and then I said a gradient in my lowest value. I said more colors. I said, say FFF. This may not be exactly, that gives me my red. I can add a middle color. I can say more colors, and I think I use something like 88844. Missed an 8 there. 844. That gave me my middle color. And then for this, I think I ended up doing something like AA00, oh no, 00AA00, gave me my green, right? And then what I could do is I actually went and I snipped this, right? So I snipped this gradient, threw it into Paint, saved it as an image file, and then just inserted that image into here. So after all of that, right, then I can arrive at the visualization that I wanted, and that I think emulates pretty well what Nick did. Now, one other thing that I did in this is, if you notice when I hover over this, it's just an awful tooltip, right? I can get my category in my store, but my measure shows up, and unfortunately, right, it doesn't have a tooltip over here bucket that I could actually put my profit margin in. So we can solve that. For first of all, we have to go in here to general. We have to actually turn tooltips on, right? And if I turn tooltips on and I say default, and then I go back here to visual, I still don't have any kind of tooltip. And this basically displays the same as if I had tooltips off, which doesn't make any sense to me, but that's how that works. So what I did was I created a tooltip page, right? I used a multi-card visual. And so then I could actually come in here to select the visual Greg, here, general, go to tooltips, switch it to a report page, page 3. And then once I do that, then if I hover over these, now I have a much nicer looking tooltip, which includes my profit margin, which is what I was going for. So, all right. So after all that, we have our visual. Now, I did go through and try a number of other visuals from the store. And this is the one that I was able to, third-party visuals. So you can see them all over here, right? And I tried a number of different of these. That one I was not able to get to work. Most of these, for whatever reason, don't allow you to put a text value into the y-axis. This one is by, I think it's by PBI Viz Edit. So it's a bubble chart. It does allow me to do it, and it allows me to get pretty close to what I want. And even without, I can have my, at least, this is not exactly what I'd like, but, that's the legend that it comes with. But in this case, as you can see, I can put my store in my x-axis, and unlike like the default scatter plot, right, I can actually control that x-axis so that its position is at the top versus the bottom, which is really nice. So that kind of emulates what's going on in Nick's book, although it is unfortunate that it does not, I don't know if I can make this continuous at all. I don't see a way to do that. But there may be an option somewhere in here that allows me to make that x-axis continuous instead of categorical, or categorical instead of continuous. Maybe if I turn the auto range off. No. That didn't seem to work. So anyway, it's unfortunate that that doesn't show up, but these categories do show up. I can get my my revenue. Now, one thing that was interesting about this is actually to use a measure for this, because if I just use revenue, it does this. and it doesn't matter how small I try to make it. And once it goes negative, then it just disappears completely. So I actually had to use a measure where I take my sum of my table revenue and divide it by 1,000,000 to get it down to like a single digit. And then when I put that in for size, then my sizes come out reasonable. And then I had to put instead of, and the other thing that was interesting was that the sum of profit margin, like I tried to use it as the color, but it didn't work. So I had to use it as the legend, which is kind of suboptimal. And this is the best one that I could come up with, right? A lot of the other ones did not work hardly at all or at all. So that was the one I could come up with the best. Maybe you guys can find a better scatter plot out there that would work better than this one. Not sure why that did not save. There we go. All right, so after all that, we can create what I thought was a really, really cool, interesting, and unique visual that I had never really seen in Power BI before. And like I said, now I know why. So that is all I had for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.